Without the governance, you have a lot of organizations that only worry about the technology. They don't have any processes in place, whether you're using NIST, whether you're using ISO, no matter what you're using. Having a framework to govern by has got to be a decision.
SC Media and our sponsor Spirion are proud to present this month's CISO Stories program. Each month, the CISO Stories program explores a cybersecurity topic selected by the Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO community and provides content that examines that topic from a variety of perspectives. Hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, best-selling author of CISO Compass, the CISO Stories weekly podcast features content powered by the 1,100-plus members of the Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO community. Listen to previous CISO Stories podcast episodes at CISOstoriespodcast.com. Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CSC. Hi, I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Michael Redmond, Deputy CISO at Metro Louisville. Welcome, Michael.
Good morning. Hi, thank you.
So before we get started today, what interested you into the cybersecurity space?
You know, it's interesting. I had been doing business continuity for years and disaster recovery and emergency management. And years ago, realized, what if there's information security issues here? We were just worried about people taking papers and such. And then, what about the cyber issues? And found out that for many of the plans I was looking at, they had never considered these things. I said, well, somebody needs to. So I started working with it. I worked with Deloitte for 5 years and with KPMG for 3. And so I was the senior manager responsible for enterprise risk management for our clients. And we certainly had a cyber division there. But we were doing it very differently. We weren't, it was being treated as a separate entity. And I said, it all has to be rolled in together. So that's sort of how I got interested in it, if that makes long story, but that was the weird thing. So I just said, this is, it just seemed like a natural next steps.
Well, that's good. I mean, we all find our paths in those different ways, and I think that's a very good way to get into cybersecurity. So today we're going to be talking about data governance is critical to information security and privacy. So, start us off with this. How is this? What's the importance of data governance to cybersecurity?
It's absolutely critical. That's the whole reason for cybersecurity, is to protect the data. And you can't protect the data if you don't have somebody governing the whole process. Some of the we're implementing. We're doing a gap analysis. We've done ISO 2701 here for years, but we're doing ISO 2701 and 2702, requiring the city to be compliant with both, including 2702. And so with that, there's a whole section on governance. And I'm interviewing the CIO. And I said, you can't look anything up. You can't write it. Let's see what you really know. I'm interviewing all of the leaders, and they're being evaluated. I'm writing down whether they're compliant or not in their knowledge. And my gap analysis is going to be audited by the internal audit. And that report's going to the mayor. So we're pretty serious about it. And it's without the governance, you have a lot of organizations that only worry about the technology. They don't have any processes in place, whether you're using NIST, whether you're using ISO, no matter what you're using. Having a framework to govern by has got to be a decision. Everyone is doing something different, and you can have all the technology in the world. And it's interesting, when an organization does a gap analysis, they find out that there's a lot of holes. And they're not meeting this control the way they thought. They're not meeting that control the way they thought. It's different than doing just an audit. Making sure that you have your penetration tests going and making sure, okay, fine, we know that if this is safe, that's safe. People worry about their ports, et cetera, which is certainly important. But what about the policies, the procedures that people use that govern the people who are going to be touching the computers? Let's face it, most of the phishing events that have happened, that have been executed, are human error. And so all of that comes under governance.
Okay. What is so in ISO and PCI and these other frameworks?
Yeah.
What sort of requirements do they have around data governance?
Although they do, definitely ISO does. We also have HIPAA because we have the Department of Health underneath us. They have a section of it as a requirement. PCI has some of the data governance aspects. More of what you have to do. Without data governance, you can't ensure it's happening. So we also have to meet the Kentucky state controls. We have the CJIS because we have the three police departments underneath us. And so we have many different things. And it's interesting because without the governance aspects, it's there. But for ISO, it's actually a requirement, which is why we use that as opposed to the NIST. NIST doesn't have it as a actual requirement as one of the controls. It's in there. It's certainly in there as a part of it. But it is not as, there's a whole section. There's 10 pages dedicated to governance in the narrative portions for ISO. So it's very critical. And what's interesting about the ISO is it's being used by 154 countries in all industries. And it's every country makes a decision. And so we said, we're going to use, we certainly look at NIST. NIST is very good for the technical controls. HIPAA actually requires that your encryption use the requirements from NIST. So we certainly do stay into that. But it's they're becoming more, even outside the city. The FFIEC for banking added in a whole section on governance requirements years ago that they hadn't had prior. So people are realizing it. And if you look at the number of companies that have had huge fines, corporations that have had huge fines, if they'd had a better governance and program in place, they would not have had that. Many of them got the fines not because they were attacked and had, they recovered everything else, but because they hadn't done a risk assessment and impact analysis. Huge banks, huge. There was I won't say which one, but there is a cruise line that was coming out of New York City. And they decided they were going to offer health insurance or travel insurance to people traveling on the trips. It was a new division they had entered into. They did not have a good governance program and didn't realize New York State for insurance requires Department of Financial Services compliance, which has a governance component of it. And it also has multi-factor authentication as a requirement. They didn't have that. So instead, now they were fined so highly, and they had never had an attack. But when New York State did an audit, they didn't even realize it. They were all over the world doing this. And the governance program was lacking, and they closed the whole insurance company from this cruise line. They just closed it down.
Got data? Know where it is? At Spirion, they're dedicated to helping organizations find and protect their most sensitive information. A single mission: deliver unmatched 98.5% accuracy in discovering personal, sensitive, and regulated data, no matter where it lives, with actionable insights to protect what matters most. That's why Spirion is step one. Visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/Spirion to learn more. So what are some of those key aspects, or when we say data governance, what does that look like? Let's say I'm new to this, and you said, we've got 10 pages of ISO stuff, we've got the New York stuff. What is that? What is it that I need to be doing?
What do you do, and how do you know you're done?
Yeah. What is it I'm supposed to be doing so that I can be successful?
We put together a data governance team, if you will, from all the different agencies, and we have 43 agencies. So we went through and added in the different standards, the different requirements, but we also put, how do we make sure that data does not, if it contains PCI, is it being treated properly? And that includes data that's going to be shared on our websites, data that's going to be shared. How is it being transmitted? So we look at the data, even though it's not a cyber issue. I'm on the group because I represent cyber and all of our interest on it, because they are Metro Louisville notices that the cyber is a big part of it, etc. And now that we have the policies written and such, and that's been sent out, and it had to go through the whole city councils, etc. Everybody gets a chance to vote on these and how that's handled. And now we have a board that is made up of cyber, of EA, of the different heads to ensure that the data is protected and that the governance of the data remains intact, including the policies of the data, what are we going to do next? Everything has to be approved. And how do we go through that approval process? What information is shared? As you saw, we were very, very careful making sure that people understand what data is. It's not just the written letters. It's anything that it could be written, it could be electronic data. And people forget that data also includes all their paper documents. And so that's an interesting aspect of it. So the policies are important. You have to have a data governance policy and decide how you're doing that. You don't have to have one framework. You can choose, from several. But the data governance policy is very important, because that is how management says, this is what we expect.
What sort of things would you expect to see in a data governance policy?
Some of those things would be how you're going to have your team structure. We set up a steering committee. We set up the controller who's going to be handling that data and ensuring it. We set up for lack of a better word, a steward that's going to be managing the data once it comes into a repository. And so we make sure that everybody's aware and that we have a chain of command from the time that you upload a piece of document. Somebody in that agency is making sure, what materials do we have? Where is it coming from? And one of the things we're undertaking now, as every organization, some things are baby steps, some things are more advanced than others. So we're undertaking knowing exactly what every piece of data set resides, what databases that data set in, and what applications are using that database, and where does that information get shared out to. So we go down to that level. And
how do you determine that, where all this data is? Because you've got structured data in databases, you've got unstructured data. What do you do to find all that?
Yeah, that's the challenge, and it's not an easy process. It can take 2 years for an organization to.
Do you use tools for that, or non-specific tools?
First, we're doing a very simple process. We're doing a questionnaire to the head of every agency. Where are your, what is your key data that you consider most critical? What are the things that are most important to you if something were to happen to it? Not just from a cyber point of view, but from a business continuity view, from a PII view. We kind of go, so it's all going through. So we're finding out what applications they're concerned about, and then we tie that to the databases, and then we're tying that to the data sets within that. So we're doing a reverse process. It's easier to start that way. There are, of course, there's data scientists would certainly be able to help this and do a lot of materials. We don't have that type of budget, to be able to do that. But I know that my daughter, that's her field, and she's like, why don't you just do this? Why don't you just do that? I said, we can't afford you. You're too expensive. It's great ideas. And But so we're taking it from a baby steps. But having a today there's different titles in data. Management. You have data engineers. You have data scientists. So it's or an enterprise engineer that's responsible for the areas of that. So it's a whole new world.
It kind of takes me back or earlier in my career, and I know I've said this before on the podcast, but the first half of my career, I actually worked. We called it data management, information resource management. I
Yes.
was managing DBAs and data modelers. We had data dictionaries, and we kept track of where all this information was, and then is the security side, and I feel like I'm combining these two halves together now, and it answers that age-old question of how can you protect what you don't know what you have. So
Yeah.
how is
That's our major concern, and that's why, unfortunately, it's we've done a good job of knowing at least where most of the uh, data sets for all of the agencies, but now knowing what databases that resides in is looking at that as another component, because the data sets are out there, or maybe you could have set 20 applications accessing the same database. So how do we know where that's going? What's that chain? And ideally, in a new organization, you would do that from scratch. Coming back to an organization that's as old as a city, that is a little bit of a reverse engineering process, and it'll take about 2 years before it's totally underway,
so
totally
So,
accomplished.
so what do you do with access rights as you're going through this project and people have access to different things? What do you do once you collect all this information about where the information is?
Well, we already know at least with our tools. Also, we can certainly find out a lot. We have cyber tools, etc. So we know who has access controls to what areas, and each area has already defined who should have access to certain applications, certain areas. So so that's somewhat underway. We're not certainly we're way ahead of most cities, and we're way ahead of a lot of organizations in that respect. But again, starting from scratch, it is a process of. I'm trying to think of how to word this so it comes across easier than it sounds, because it's not easy. But I'm trying to make it sound easier. It is a matter of. Uh, well, first of all, we go by PCI. If the data contains PCI, we have listings on those. If it contains BCI, if it contains health information, we've already identified that. So we know where those are. We know what applications use those. That's been defined. So that's what databases use those. So we have that defined. So at least from that point of view, we're somewhat secure. And of course, the data is classified. So because you can look at the classification of the data, every piece of data we have is classified. We have a policy on that for data classification. And we also have included that under our data governance policies. What we did was we took the cyber policies that already been existing and incorporated that into the data structures as they're increasing the data governance documentation, which existed before, but we're taking it to the next level. Metro Louisville is more like an international corporation. And my first MBA is in international business. And I certainly know this is, and I've worked as before I came into this field years ago when I was doing consulting. I've worked for large international corporations. I've worked for Chase. I've worked, consulting for Fidelity. I've done consulting for Emblem Health. I've done consulting around the world. I've worked in Angola, and I've worked in Kenya, and there is a commonality around the world. I'd love to say that one area is different than the other, but as a consultant who's gone internationally in the past, I can tell you that all the organizations are structured differently. But when it comes to data, the thinking process, the data is the same, whether it's HIPAA or a PCI. It doesn't matter what country it's in, whether you're talking GDPR. And I went out and got certified in GDPR because, we certainly want to make sure, even though we're not dealing with that or need to, it's a phenomenal process on how do we handle, the data, what should be done. So why not use a tool that's out there? Why not learn that process? And so we consider that. We look at GDPR, we look at everything and say, is there something else we should be pulling from? Something else we have forgotten? And but I think that the first thing is to have a data governance board, have that data governance put together their policies, put together a structure of how every single department or each country that you have, et cetera, is going to handle that, classifying every piece of data. We don't just go by PCI as such. We also say if it's official, non-official, for official use only, internal use only, whatever classifications you want. There's many of them out there. But and it doesn't matter what you call, as long as you know what it means. And so we have everything. That is, we do know the classifications, and that is a key thing. And I think that many organizations forget to classify. Part of my background is I'm retired lieutenant colonel, so we had to write every piece of paper we had was classified. I was at a point when I was in a restaurant signing a check saying, should I mark this unclassified? I mean, it got to be so much in my head.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned GDPR. I think it's such a key law. I think it's the genesis for many, many laws, and in fact, it was one of the impetuses for. We just released a new book, the Privacy Leader Compass, which is really about operationalizing privacy for privacy leaders and their teams, because one of the issues with laws like GDPR and the other laws, the other privacy laws that we're dealing with, is it really doesn't tell you how to implement that. It just gives you the law as to what you need to do. And so we've taken that a step further and given that guidance into that as well. So this has been fascinating, and I think the whole governance question is so important for organizations to get their hands around that. I have a question. I worked for a large organization once, and we were getting business owners to take ownership of different pieces of information. And, so where you have your user manager who's requesting access to that, but then you have the owner of the data. And so we're trying to marry those together. And one of the difficulties was getting business owners to actually accept responsibility for that data, because or an application, because you have an organization has thousands of applications in their organization, and they don't really know what that application, all the different settings for accesses, or who really needs access for it. So how did you manage that to get business owners to take
It's
to
kind of
take
nice
acceptance?
when our business owners happen to be agencies underneath the mayor. It makes it a little bit easier. Uh, you can be, it makes it a little bit easier. But I think that should be the same if you're a CEO. Those business owners work for the organization. And I think getting that comes from not data governance, but governance in itself, from senior management saying, this is not an option. I think senior management buy-in is the first step. It's just like a child. You can tell a child to clean their room and clean their room. If you're the babysitter, nobody listens. If you're the parent saying, clean your room, that room is clean. It depends on who's saying it, And, I think back to when I was 13 and babysitting, saying, they've got to have this room clean before the parents get home, And then I became a parent and I said, it's a little easier, and that's just it. So the CEO is the parent. CFO, the CIO, and we have that buy-in here. We also have a very strong CIO. He is, I would say, I would say he's one of the best I've ever seen in my life, and have lots of corporations. He's hands on. He knows exactly what's happening to everything. He's reviewed our gap assessment every week. He's involved with the data governance board. He's knowing what's going on. He's extremely involved. And the person we have who is his title is not CDO, but his function is, and what he does is CDO, and we all think of him as the CDO, and Andrew McKinney, and he does a wonderful job of driving this. He was the one that said, what else do we need? Do we need cyber? And I said, yes. Who else do we need to have on this? Who else do we need? And that was the first questions. Who should be on the thing? Who's going to have the governance board? And we did the basic policies and procedures, but Andrew Light has been great on it. The CIO, Chris, has just done a phenomenal job of ensuring that from a technology point. And as you can see, you met the head of our enterprise architecture this morning. It's very collaborative.
It's so important. It's so important. So it sounds like you've got all those big players, involved in this governance aspect. It's so important.
Yeah.
So what final advice
on the governance steering committee?
So what final advice would you give to emerging CISOs, new CISOs, current CISOs as they're trying to, ensure that they have a good data governance strategy in their organization?
First thing I would say is choose a framework. I find the ISO data governance policies standards easy because it has a whole standard on, this is what you need to do, here's your next steps, as opposed to having to go to lots of different documents. There's also a privacy document that ties in with the ISO 27001. And so so it deals with now you also have the cybersecurity aspects for protecting it, listed in the same document. So that's my preference, but there's other tools. So choose a framework, whatever framework you like, and use that as a guide, and then put together your steering committee. What do we need to have? What is this going to look like? What's missing? And, that is everything. People who are going to be responsible not only for the data at rest, but data at transmission, et cetera. So that is how do we protect the data from a security point of view? How do we make sure that from an administrative point of view, that the policies are in place, and from a management point of view, how do we get senior management buy-in? I think those are the first things that you have to think about, and that sounds much easier than doing. It takes a while.
Well,
and be patient with yourselves. Be patient with yourselves. It is not, as you know, Todd, not an easy process. You came from this side. It's not easy.
Absolutely. Well, thanks a lot, Michael. It's been great talking with you today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. We want to say a special thank you to our sponsor, Spirion. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast and you will receive a new story each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you next week for a new episode.